Alien scouts detected a dangerous human fleet. Moments later. Entire fleet went dark. Seconds. Scout Captain Ieth Voss did not like the empty stretch of space near the Kelvorn Drift. It was too quiet. For 3 years she had flown patrols along this border, watching the black for any sign of movement, and for 3 years nothing had happened. Her ship, the Vakari scout vessel Thin Whisper, was small, fast, and built for one job only: to see danger before anyone else did, and to run before that danger saw her. Tonight, her sensors saw something they had never seen before. "Captain, you need to look at this," said her sensor officer, a young Vakari named Doran Mesh. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of nerves among his kind. "I am reading. I do not know what I am reading." Ieth walked to his station. The Vakari were a tall, thin species, with pale blue skin and long fingers built for delicate work. Their eyes were large and dark, made for reading light in the dim glow of their home star. Ieth's eyes narrowed as she looked at the screen. A wall of ships had appeared out of nowhere. "That is not possible," she said quietly. "Nothing can arrive that fast. Nothing we know of." The screen showed hundreds of large vessels, spread out in a formation that looked almost lazy, almost careless, and yet every ship sat in a perfect position relative to the others. It was the kind of formation you built when you were not afraid of being attacked. It was the formation of something powerful. "Species?" Ieth asked. Doran's fingers moved fast over his console. "Running it now. Captain, the hull design matches archive records. This is a human fleet." The bridge went silent. Only the low hum of the engines remained. Every Vakari knew about humans. Every species in this part of the galaxy knew about humans, whether they had ever met one or not. The stories had spread for decades, carried by traders, refugees, and old records passed down like warnings. Humans were the species that fought a war against 3 separate empires at once, and won 2 of them outright. Humans were the species that built weapons out of things that should not have been weapons: asteroids, comets, even their own ships when nothing else was left. Humans were the species other species did not want to make angry. And now, according to Doran's screen, there was a human fleet of at least 400 ships, sitting quietly on the edge of Vakari territory. "Confirm the count," Ieth ordered. "Confirmed. 412 capital ships. There are more, smaller vessels I cannot get a clean count on. Captain, this is bigger than anything in our records, bigger than the fleet that ended the Second Colvarian War." Ieth felt her hearts. She had 2, like all Vakari, begin to beat faster. She had trained for years to stay calm in dangerous moments, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this. A single human warship was already a serious threat by most accounts. 400 of them, sitting in one place, was something else entirely. It was not just a fleet. It could be the start of an invasion. "Send the report now," she said. "Full sensor data, ship count, position, and heading. Send it to Fleet Command and to every relay station between here and home." "Sending," Doran said. His voice shook slightly. "Captain, should we move closer? Get better readings?" Ieth thought about it for only a second. Every part of her training said to hold position and observe, but every part of her instinct said to run. She had heard enough stories about humans to know that curiosity around them had a habit of getting people killed. "No," she said. "We hold at this range. We do not want their attention. Doran, keep recording everything. Every signal, every energy spike, every single thing that ship of theirs does. Command will want it all." For a long moment, nothing happened. The human fleet simply sat there, unmoving, its running lights glowing steady against the black of space. Ieth watched the screen, waiting for something. A change in formation, a weapon powering up, anything that would tell her what these humans were planning. Then Doran made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a whisper. "Captain, look." On the screen, one by one, the lights on the human ships began to go out. At first Ieth thought it was a sensor error. She had Doran run a full diagnostic, but the ship reported no fault. The lights really were going out, ship by ship, starting from the edge of the formation and moving inward like a wave. "Energy readings?" she asked, her voice tight. "Dropping. Captain, every ship's power output is falling. Fast. Faster than I have ever seen. It's like they are all turning off at once. Ayeth stared at the screen in disbelief. 412 ships, and their power signatures were vanishing in seconds. Weapons systems, shields, engines, even the small heat signatures from life support, all of it dropping towards zero in a wave that swept across the entire fleet. That is not a shutdown, Doran said, almost to himself. That is too fast. No ship powers down that fast unless... He stopped. Unless what? Ayeth demanded. Unless it is not powering down. Unless it is hiding. The bridge fell silent again. Ayeth understood what he meant, and the thought sent a cold feeling through her body. A ship that powers down slowly is a ship having a problem. A ship that goes dark all at once, in perfect unison across hundreds of vessels, is a ship following an order. It was not weakness. It was discipline. It was a fleet of 400 ships, acting as one single mind, doing exactly what they had been trained to do, the moment some signal was given. Final readings, Ayeth said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Get me final readings before they go fully dark. Doran's fingers flew across his console. Getting them now. Captain, this is strange. Their weapons never powered up. Their shields never engaged. They just stopped, like nothing was ever there in the first place. Within 20 seconds, the entire human fleet had gone dark. No lights, no engine glow, no weapon signatures, no life support heat. To the naked eye, and even to most sensors, the space where 412 human warships had been sitting now looked completely empty. Are they still there? Ayeth asked. Or did they leave? Doran adjusted his sensors, switching to passive gravity detection, a method that did not rely on light or heat. It was slower and less precise, but harder to hide from. They are still there, he said after a moment. I am picking up gravity distortion consistent with large metal hulls. Captain, they have not moved. They just went silent. All of them, at the exact same moment. Ayeth sat down slowly in her captain's chair. She had flown patrols for over a decade. She had seen pirate raids, small border skirmishes, and once, a rogue AI ship that had to be destroyed before it reached a populated system. None of it compared to this. She was looking at a fleet larger than anything in Vakari history, sitting silently on the edge of their space, having just demonstrated a level of coordination that should not have been possible for a group that size. Doran, she said quietly, I need you to be honest with me. Have you ever heard of anything, any species, doing what we just watched? Doran shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the readings. No, Captain. Nothing. Not even close. Then we are the first ones to see this. Yes, Captain. Ayeth looked at the dark patch of space on her screen, empty now except for the faint gravity readings that told her something enormous was still sitting there, waiting, silent and unseen. Send another report, she said. Full priority. Tell command that the human fleet has gone dark, all 412 ships, in under 20 seconds. Tell them we believe this was intentional. Tell them we believe this is some kind of stealth capability we have never encountered before. Sending now, Doran said. He paused. Captain, should we withdraw? Ayeth thought about the question carefully. If the humans wanted to attack, they could have done it already, while their weapons were fully powered, and the thin whisper had no idea what was coming. Instead, they had gone dark and quiet, choosing stealth over violence. That, in its own strange way, was almost reassuring. Almost. Not yet, she said. We hold position at maximum safe range. If they wanted us dead, we would already know it. For now, I want to understand what we are looking at before we run from it. Understood, Captain. The two of them sat in silence, watching a patch of empty-looking space that they both knew was not empty at all. Somewhere out there, in the dark, 412 human warships sat perfectly still, waiting for something. Ayeth did not know what that something was. She only knew that whatever it was, it would not be good news for anyone who was not human. Hours passed. The thin whisper held its position, sensors running constantly, recording every faint gravity ripple, every tiny signal that leaked through the human silence. Ayeth did not sleep. She sat in her chair, watching the dark patch on her screen, thinking about all the stories she had heard about humans over the years. She thought about the Second Culverian War, where a human fleet a fraction of this size had broken the siege of an entire star system in a single night. She thought about the stories of human ships ramming enemy vessels rather than retreat, of human soldiers fighting on after their ships were destroyed, using nothing but boarding pods and stubbornness. She thought about the old warning passed down by traders from species who had dealt with humans before. Never assume they are finished, and never assume you understand what they are doing. Captain, Doran said suddenly, breaking the long silence. I am picking up something. A very faint signal, buried under a lot of noise. It is coming from the center of the dark fleet. Ayeth leaned forward. Can you clean it up? Trying. His fingers moved quickly. It is a communication burst. Extremely short, extremely tight beam. It does not appear to be meant for us. I think it is meant for another human ship. Can you translate it? Not fully. Our language database on human speech is old and incomplete. But I caught a few words. Doran looked up, his 4 eyes wide. Captain, one of the words was repeated 3 times. I believe it means hold, as in, an order to hold position. Ayeth's mind raced. A fleet that large, going dark in under 20 seconds, and now sending internal orders to hold position. This was not an accident, and it was not a malfunction. This was a plan carried out with perfect discipline by a species already known throughout the galaxy for winning wars against enemies far larger than themselves. Doran, she said slowly, I think we need to consider the possibility that this is not a defensive move. What do you mean, Captain? I mean that a fleet does not need to hide if it is only trying to protect itself. Hiding a fleet this size, this completely, this fast, that takes planning, that takes purpose. She looked back at the screen, at the empty-looking dark where 412 ships waited in silence. I think we may be looking at the opening move of something much bigger. Doran said nothing. He simply stared at his screen, watching the faint gravity ripples that marked the presence of a fleet that had, in every way that mattered to Vicari sensors, simply ceased to exist. Far above them, in the true dark of open space, the human fleet sat exactly where it had gone silent, its ships cold and dark, its crews waiting for the order that would tell them what came next. None of them made a sound. None of them showed a single light. They simply waited, patient and unseen, while a lone Vicari scout ship watched from a safe distance, recording everything and understanding almost nothing. While they waited, Doran pulled up the old archive files on humanity, the ones every Vicari scout was required to study before being allowed near the border. Most of it was second-hand information, gathered from other species who had crossed paths with humans over the years. Some of it came from recordings so old the file dates had faded. Still, it was all they had. Captain, listen to this, Doran said, reading from the screen. This is from a trader report filed almost 40 years ago. It says humans do not fight like other species. Most fleets try to win with the fewest losses possible. Humans, according to this report, are willing to lose ships, even lose battles, if it means winning the war. They plan in years, not days. That matches what I have heard, Ayeth said. My old instructor used to say humans do not think in terms of single battles. They think in terms of what happens 5 moves later. There is more. Doran scrolled further. Another entry, this one from a diplomat who negotiated with them after the Second Culvarian War. She wrote that humans are almost frightening in how calm they can be. She said their leaders spoke about the deaths of their own soldiers with sadness, real sadness, but never with panic. She said it was like watching someone who had already accepted that the fight would cost lives, and had simply decided the cost was worth it. Ayeth felt a chill run through her. A species that could accept loss so completely, and still keep fighting, was a species that did not scare easily. And a species that did not scare easily was very hard to stop once it had made up its mind about something. Do we know why they might be here? She asked. Anything in the old files about human interest in this region? Doran searched for several minutes before shaking his head. Nothing recent. The closest human territory on record is many weeks away by any drive system we know of. If this fleet came from there, using normal engines, we would have had warning long before now. Which means either our maps of human space are wrong, or they have found a faster way to travel than anything we understand. Or both, Ayeth muttered. The thought sat heavily between them. If humans had developed a drive system capable of moving a fleet of 400 ships across such a distance without any warning, then every defense plan the Vakari had ever built along this border was already useless. It would mean humans could appear almost anywhere, at almost any time, and no one would know until it was too late. Ayeth stood and walked to the front viewport, looking out at the stars, unable to see the dark fleet with her own eyes, but knowing exactly where it sat. She thought about her homeworld, about the cities full of Vakari going about their lives, unaware that somewhere out here, on the edge of everything they knew, a fleet capable of ending all of it in a single night was sitting quietly in the dark, waiting. "Doran," she said without turning around, "how long until command responds to our report? Given the distance to the nearest relay and the time it takes to reach fleet headquarters after that, I would guess 6 to 8 hours before we hear anything back, Captain. Possibly longer if they need to convene the council first." 6 to 8 hours, Ayeth repeated. "That is a long time to sit next to something like this and do nothing. What else can we do, Captain?" Ayeth turned back to face him. "We keep watching, we keep recording, and we make sure that whatever happens next, someone besides us knows about it." She paused, thinking. "Send a second copy of the report through the long-range beacon as well. I do not want our only record of this depending on one relay chain." "Yes, Captain." As Doran worked, Ayeth returned to her chair and watched the dark patch of space once more. The gravity readings had not changed. The fleet had not moved. It simply sat there, silent and enormous, a shape she could not see but could feel pressing on her mind like a held breath. She thought about the stories again, the ones about human stubbornness, human patience, and human willingness to wait for exactly the right moment before acting. If this fleet had gone dark on purpose, with this much discipline, then whatever they were waiting for had not happened yet, and that meant the true danger, whatever it was, had not even begun. "Captain," Doran said quietly, breaking her thoughts. The gravity signature just shifted, very slightly. Something inside the fleet moved. Ayeth's whole body went still. "Show me." "It is small. I think it might be a single ship, breaking away from the main formation. Still no light, still no power signature I can detect, but the mass distribution changed just a little." "Track it," Ayeth ordered, her heart pounding in her chest. "I want to know exactly where it goes." Doran nodded, his fingers moving quickly across his console, and the two of them leaned forward together, watching a screen that showed almost nothing at all, and yet somehow felt like it was showing them everything that mattered. The report Ayeth sent that night would reach Vakari Fleet Command within the hour. It would be read, reread, and passed up the chain until it reached the highest levels of the Vakari military, and within that report, buried among the sensor data and gravity readings, was a single line that Ayeth had written herself, one that would be repeated many times in the days that followed. "We do not know what the humans are planning. We only know that they are ready for it, and we are not." Fleet Marshal Dreon Kell read the report from Scout Captain Ayeth Voss 3 times before he called an emergency meeting of the Vakari High Council. He was an old officer, one who had served through 2 border wars and countless smaller skirmishes, and he did not scare easily. But as he sat alone in his office, staring at the words on his screen, he felt something close to fear for the first time in many years. 412 human warships. A power down that took less than 20 seconds, executed across the entire fleet at once. A tight beam signal, ordering ships to hold position. And now, according to the most recent update, a single vessel breaking away from the dark formation, moving in a direction that Doran Mesh's tracking, placed on a slow path toward Vakari-controlled space. Dreon rubbed the ridge above his eyes, a habit he had picked up from years of staring at reports too long. He was not a young officer anymore, and the weight of what he was reading sat heavily on his chest. He had fought against smaller, weaker fleets in his time, and even those fights had cost lives he still remembered. A fleet like this one, if it turned hostile, would not be a fight. It would be an ending. He picked up his comm unit and called for the council to gather within the hour. The council chamber was a wide, circular room built high in the Vakari capital, its domed ceiling made of a special glass that let in the pale light of their home star. 11 council members sat in a ring, along with Dreon and 2 of his senior officers. At the center of the room, a large holographic display showed the sensor data sent by the Thin Whisper, updated in near real time thanks to the relay chain Iyeth had insisted on using. 400 ships, said Counselor Vess Thane, the oldest member of the council, her voice tight with disbelief. Marshal Kell, are you certain this data is accurate? Our scout fleet has never reported anything close to this size. The data has been checked twice, Drayon said, once by the scout crew themselves, and once by our own analysis division after the report reached us. It is accurate. This is the largest fleet ever recorded near our territory, by any species, in the history of our sensor network. A murmur ran through the chamber. Counselor Reth Ilvan, a younger member known for his caution, leaned forward. And this fleet belongs to the humans. Confirmed by hull design and drive signature, said one of Drayon's officers. There is no doubt. Then why has it gone dark? Vess Thane asked. If they wish to attack us, why hide? Why not simply strike while we had no defense ready? It was a fair question, and one Drayon himself had been turning over since he first read the report. He stood, walking slowly to the center of the room where the hologram floated, showing the dark patch of space where the fleet remained hidden. I do not believe this is an attack fleet in the way we understand attacks, he said. I believe this is something else. A show of strength, perhaps. Or a test. Humans are known for testing their enemies before committing to a full engagement. They study reactions. They learn how a species responds under pressure before deciding how to proceed. You believe we are being watched right now, Reth Ilvan said quietly. I believe it is possible, yes. The chamber fell silent for a long moment. Then Vess Thane spoke again, her voice steadier now. Bring in the Xenology division. If anyone can tell us what the humans are planning, it will be them. Analyst Sarah Iolan had spent the last 6 years of her career studying humanity, and in all that time, she had never expected to be called into an emergency council session. She was young for her position, barely past her early service years, but she had earned her place through sheer dedication. While other analysts studied trade patterns or weapons technology, Sarah had focused entirely on human behavior, human history, and the strange, sometimes contradictory stories that other species told about them. When she walked into the council chamber and saw the size of the fleet displayed on the hologram, her breath caught in her throat. Analyst Iolan, Fleet Marshal Kell said, gesturing for her to step forward. You have studied humans longer than anyone else in our service. Tell us what you make of this. Sarah looked at the data for a long moment before speaking. She had read hundreds of accounts about human military behavior, pieced together from trade records, diplomatic notes, and the occasional captured or shared archive. None of it had prepared her for numbers this large. Counselors, Marshal, she began, choosing her words carefully. What we are seeing here matches a pattern described in several older accounts of human fleet behavior, though never at this scale. Humans have a doctrine they sometimes call silent presence. It is not meant as an attack, it is meant as a message. A message, Reth Ilvan repeated. What kind of message is a fleet of 400 warships going completely dark? It is a demonstration of control, Sarah said. Any fleet can show off its weapons. Any fleet can power up and display strength through noise and light. But very few fleets can demonstrate the kind of discipline required to go silent, all at once, across hundreds of ships, without a single mistake. What the humans are showing us is not their weapons. It is their command structure. It is proof that if they choose to strike, they will do so exactly when they intend to, and not a moment before. The chamber was quiet as the council absorbed this. Then this is a warning, Vess Thane said slowly. I believe so, yes, Sarah said. Based on historical patterns, humans tend to use this kind of demonstration when they wish to establish a boundary, or when they believe a conflict may be approaching, and want the other side to understand the cost of starting one before anything happens. Do we know of anything that might have provoked this? Drayon asked, looking around the chamber. Any incident, any dispute, anything at all involving human interests near our border? There was a long pause. Then one of the younger council members, Corvin Dale, cleared his throat nervously. Marshal, there was an incident 3 months ago. A group of independent miners, operating near the edge of our territory, intercepted and disabled a small unmanned probe. The probe was recovered and studied. Our engineers believed it to be an old exploration drone, likely lost from some other species decades ago. It was not flagged as significant. "Where is this probe now?" Drayon asked, his voice sharp. "In storage, at Research Station Veril. It has not been touched since the initial study." "Get someone to that probe immediately," Drayon ordered. "I want to know its true origin within the hour." It took less than that. The report came back fast, and when it did, it explained a great deal. The probe was human, old according to its wear patterns, but human beyond any doubt, carrying markings that matched known human exploration technology from several decades earlier. It had likely been mapping unclaimed space when the miners intercepted it, disabled it, and took it apart for scrap value, never realizing what they were dealing with. "They destroyed a human exploration drone," Sarah said quietly, once the report was read aloud to the council. "And humans, from everything I have studied, take their exploration assets seriously. Losing contact with a drone would have triggered an investigation. If that investigation led them here, to a region where an unclaimed device was destroyed by independent operators, they would want answers," Drayon finished for her. "Yes, Marshal. And based on the size of the fleet sent, I believe they wanted to make certain those answers were given seriously." The council chamber erupted into a storm of voices, councilors arguing over what should be done, whether an apology should be issued, whether the miners responsible should be handed over, whether any of this would even matter to a fleet already sitting silently on their doorstep. Drayon let them argue for a moment, before raising his hand for silence. "This changes nothing about the immediate danger," he said. "Whether this began as an accident or a deliberate act, we now have 400 human warships within striking distance of our border, and they have demonstrated a level of discipline that terrifies me more than any weapon could. We need to decide, now, how we respond. Do we attempt contact?" Rethilvan asked. "Send a diplomatic signal, explain what happened, offer restitution." "That is the safest first step," Sarah said. "Humans, from what I have studied, generally prefer to resolve conflicts through communication before violence, provided the other side is willing to take responsibility honestly. But I must stress, Marshal, councilors, if we attempt to hide what happened, or downplay it, the consequences could be severe. Humans respond very badly to being lied to." Drayon nodded slowly. "Then we tell them the truth, all of it. We explain the incident, we offer whatever restitution is appropriate, and we ask, respectfully, what they intend by bringing a fleet this size to our border." "And if the answer is not one we want to hear?" Vesthane asked quietly. No one answered her right away. The question hung in the air of the chamber, heavy and unwelcome. Finally, Drayon spoke. "Then we will deal with that when it comes. For now, our priority is honesty and speed. Prepare a diplomatic transmission. I want it ready within the hour, and I want Scout Captain Voss to remain in position to relay it, since she is the only one of ours currently within range." Aboard the Thin Whisper, Ayath received the order with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief, because Command was finally taking action instead of leaving her alone with this. Dread, because it meant her small scout ship would be the one carrying humanity's first real message from the Vicari people, sent directly toward a fleet that had already proven it could vanish and reappear at will. "Captain," Doran said, watching his console, "the breakaway ship we tracked earlier, it has stopped moving. It is holding position roughly halfway between the main fleet and our patrol line. Just sitting there? Just sitting there. Still no active power signature, still no light, but the gravity readings suggest it is larger than a standard scout vessel, possibly a command ship, sent ahead of the others." Ayath stared at the data, thinking about Sarah Iolan's theory, though she did not yet know it by name. A silent fleet, a silent scout ship, sent forward like a single hand raised in warning before any words were spoken. It was, in its own way, more frightening than an outright attack would have been. An attack, at least, would have been simple to understand. "Prepare the diplomatic transmission for broadcast, the moment Command sends it," she said. "And Doran, when we send it, I want you ready to record every single response, no matter how small." "Understood, Captain." Back in the council chamber, Fleet Marshal Kell stayed behind after the other councilors had left, along with Sarah Iolan and his 2 senior officers. He wanted more from her, questions the formal session had not given him time to ask. Analyst Iolin, he said, once the room had cleared. Sit, please. I want your honest opinion, not the careful version you gave the council. Sarah hesitated, then took a seat across from him. Marshall, everything I said was honest. I know, but I could see you holding something back. What is it? She folded her hands together, choosing her words with care. There is a detail in the older records that I did not mention, because I was not certain it was relevant. During the Second Culvarian War, human fleets used the same kind of silent approach before 3 separate major engagements. In 2 of those cases, the silence was followed by negotiation, and the conflict ended without further bloodshed. In the 3rd case— What happened in the 3rd case? Drayon asked. The other side attempted to use the silence as an opportunity. They believed the humans were vulnerable while powered down, and launched a surprise attack. Sarah's voice grew quieter. The human fleet reactivated in under 4 seconds. The attacking force was destroyed within the hour. Survivors described it as though the humans had been waiting for them to make that exact mistake. The room was silent for a long moment. You are telling me, Drayon said slowly, that this silence may be as much a trap as it is a warning. I am telling you it can be both, Marshall. That is what makes it so effective. If we act with honesty and patience, the silence likely ends in negotiation. If we act with aggression, or attempt to exploit what looks like a weakness, the consequences could be immediate and total. She met his eyes. I do not say this to frighten you further. I say it because I believe it is the truth, and you asked for my honest opinion. Drayon nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Then we will not make that mistake. I will make certain every commander along the border understands this. No one fires first. No one moves against that fleet, no matter how tempting the silence may look. Thank you, Marshall. He studied her for a moment. You have spent 6 years studying a species most of our people have never even seen with their own eyes. Do you believe they mean to destroy us, Analyst Iolin? In your true opinion? Sarah thought carefully before answering. No, Marshall. I do not believe that is their goal. Everything in the record suggests humans value diplomacy when it is offered honestly, but I also believe they do not forgive dishonesty easily, and they do not forget being tested. If we are honest now, I believe there is a real chance this ends peacefully. If we are not— She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Drayon stood, walking to the wide window that looked out over the capital city, its lights glowing softly under the darkening sky. Somewhere far beyond that horizon, past the edge of Vakari space, a fleet larger than any his people had ever built sat waiting in silence, holding its breath alongside the rest of the galaxy. Prepare the transmission, he said finally. Full honesty, no excuses, no attempts to soften what happened with the drone. I want them to know exactly who we are dealing with them, and exactly what kind of people we intend to be in return. Yes, Marshal, Sarah said, rising from her seat. As she left the chamber, she found herself thinking about Ayeth Voss, alone out there on the Thin Whisper, closer to that silent fleet than any other Vakari in history. She hoped, more than she had hoped for anything in a long time, that the humans truly were the kind of people the old records suggested, patient, disciplined, and willing to listen before they acted. Outside the Thin Whisper's viewport, the dark patch of space remained silent, patient, and unmoving, waiting for whatever the Vakari people would choose to say next. The transmission left the Thin Whisper exactly 1 hour after Fleet Marshal Kell gave the order. Ayeth Voss watched the signal indicator on her console count down, then blink green as the message left her ship and crossed the empty space toward the dark, silent shape of the human fleet. The message itself was short. Sarah Iolin had helped write it, drawing on everything she knew about how humans preferred to communicate. Direct, honest, without excessive formality or attempts to soften bad news. It explained the incident with the exploration drone, named the independent mining group responsible, offered a formal apology on behalf of the Vakari government, and asked, plainly, what the human fleet intended by its presence near Vakari space. Then came the waiting. How long before we might expect a response? Doran asked, watching his own console as if staring at it hard enough might make an answer appear sooner. I do not know, Ayeth admitted. We have no precedent for this. No one has ever sent a message to a fleet like this one before, not that our records show. Minutes passed, then an hour. The dark patch of space remained exactly as it had been, silent and unmoving, giving no sign that the message had even been received. "Captain," Doran said eventually, his voice tight. "Should we resend it? Perhaps something went wrong with the transmission." "No," Ayeth said. "The confirmation showed a clean send. They received it. They are simply choosing when to respond, if they respond at all." She thought about what Sarah Iolan had said in the brief notes attached to the Council's transmission order, that humans did not like to be rushed, and that a demand for a quick answer could be read as impatience, even hostility. So they waited, the thin whisper sitting quietly at the edge of a fleet that could, at any moment, decide their small scout ship was no longer worth ignoring. The response came almost 3 hours later, and when it did, it startled both of them so badly that Doran nearly fell out of his seat. A single light appeared on the dark patch of space, then another. Then, ship by ship, the lights of the human fleet began coming back on, not all at once this time, but in a slow, deliberate wave that started from what Ayeth now understood must be the command ship at the center of the formation. "They are powering up," Doran said, his voice a mix of fear and awe. "Captain, weapons systems are staying offline. Shields are staying offline. It is just lights. Running lights, life support, basic systems. Nothing aggressive." Ayeth watched the screen, her heart's pounding, as more and more of the human fleet became visible again, the ships resolving out of the darkness like something being drawn into existence. It was, in its own strange way, beautiful. Hundreds of vessels glowing softly against the black of space, arranged in that same lazy, confident formation as before. "Incoming transmission," Doran announced suddenly. "Captain, it is addressed directly to us, to the thin whisper by name." Ayeth's breath caught. "Put it through." The voice that came over her comm system was calm, almost gentle, speaking in careful, measured Vakari, with only a slight accent that marked it as a translated human voice rather than a natural speaker. It was, Ayeth thought, exactly the kind of voice she might have expected from someone used to being listened to without needing to raise it. "Vakari Scout Vessel Thin Whisper. This is Fleet Command of Task Force Meridian. Your message has been received and reviewed. We appreciate the honesty of your report regarding the incident with our exploration drone. Please stand by for further communication with your government. In the meantime, be advised that our fleet poses no immediate threat to your vessel or your border, provided no hostile action is taken against us." The transmission ended as calmly as it had begun. For a long moment, neither Ayeth nor Doran said anything at all. That was... Doran started, then stopped, searching for the right word. Polite. "Yes," Ayeth said slowly, "it was. I expected something colder, more threatening. So did I." Ayeth leaned back in her chair, some of the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in hours. Perhaps Analyst Iolan was right. Perhaps honesty really does matter to them. The response reached Fleet Marshal Kell and the Council within minutes, relayed at top priority through every station between the border and the capital. Sarah Iolan was called back into the chamber immediately, and this time, when she arrived, she found the mood in the room had shifted from raw fear to something more like cautious hope. "They responded," Dreon said, before she had even fully entered the room, calmly, politely even. "Analyst Iolan, does this match what you expected?" "It matches the pattern I described, yes," Sarah said, allowing herself a small measure of relief. Honesty was rewarded with civility. "This is a very good sign, Marshal." "They mentioned further communication with our government," Vesthane said. "What form do we expect that to take?" Sarah thought about it. "Based on historical precedent, I would expect a formal delegation, likely small, likely arriving aboard a single ship rather than the full fleet. Humans tend to keep diplomatic and military matters separate once initial contact has been established peacefully." "And the fleet itself?" Brethilvan asked. "Will it withdraw?" "That I cannot say with certainty," Sarah admitted. "It may remain in position until negotiations are complete, as a reminder of what is at stake, or it may withdraw immediately as a gesture of good faith. Both are consistent with what we know of their behavior." Dreon nodded slowly, processing this. "Then we prepare for a delegation. Full honors, full transparency. And Analyst Iolan, I want you present for any meeting that takes place. Your understanding of this species may be the difference between peace and disaster." I would be honored, Marshal. 3 days passed before the human delegation arrived. In that time, the fleet remained exactly where it was, lights glowing softly, weapons still offline, an enormous and patient presence sitting at the edge of Vakari space like a held breath that refused to release. Scout ships continued to monitor from a respectful distance, and slowly, the initial panic that had swept through Vakari military command began to settle into something more manageable. Not comfort exactly, but a kind of watchful calm. The delegation ship, when it finally broke away from the main fleet and began its approach toward the Vakari capital system, was smaller than Iath had expected. A single vessel, sleek and fast, its hull marked with symbols that Sarah Iolan later explained represented the human designation for a diplomatic craft. It was escorted by only 2 smaller ships, a far cry from the massive formation it had left behind. Iath, still stationed nearby per command's orders, watched it pass, and felt a strange mixture of relief and lingering unease. The fleet had not attacked. The message had been calm, even respectful, and yet the memory of that first night, the impossible speed of the fleet's arrival, the perfect, silent discipline of its power down, the sheer, overwhelming size of it all, stayed with her. A reminder that whatever peace might come from this, it would be a peace built on the knowledge of exactly how much power the other side held in reserve. "Captain," Doran said quietly, watching the delegation ship pass on his own screen, "do you think this will end well?" Iath considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I think," she said finally, "that it depends entirely on what we do next. The humans have shown us who they are. Calm, patient, honest, when honesty is offered in return. Whether this ends well depends on whether we can be the same." The delegation ship reached the Vakari capital system 2 days later, and was met by an honor escort arranged personally by Fleet Marshal Kell. Sarah Iolan stood at the edge of the landing platform, her heart's pounding, as the sleek human vessel settled down with a smoothness that suggested technology far beyond anything the Vakari possessed. When the hatch opened, and the first human stepped out into the pale light of the Vakari homestar, Sarah found herself holding her breath. She had studied this species for 6 years through old records, second-hand accounts, and fragments of translated communication. She had never expected to see one in person. The human who emerged was tall by Vakari standards, though not unusually so, dressed in a simple dark uniform without excessive decoration. Their expression, as they looked around at the gathered officials, was calm and unreadable, neither hostile nor especially warm. The expression, Sarah thought, of someone taking careful measure of a situation before deciding how to respond to it. Behind the first human came several others, moving with the same quiet, controlled discipline that Iath had witnessed in the fleet's silent power down days earlier. It was, Sarah realized, the same pattern repeated on a smaller scale: control, patience, and a complete absence of wasted motion. Fleet Marshal Kell stepped forward to greet them, and Sarah moved to stand at his side, ready to translate and advise as needed. "Welcome," Drayon said, speaking slowly and clearly, aware that his words were being translated in real time through a small device worn by the lead human. "On behalf of the Vakari people, I thank you for agreeing to meet with us." The lead human inclined their head slightly. "Thank you for the invitation, Fleet Marshal. My name is Commander Elias Ward. I lead the diplomatic division attached to Task Force Meridian." His voice, when it came through and translated Vakari, carried the same calm, measured quality Iath had noticed in the earlier transmission. "I understand there is a great deal to discuss." "There is," Drayon agreed. "Please, follow me. We have prepared a chamber for our conversation." They walked together through the capital's central hall, Vakari officials and human delegates falling into step beside one another with careful, polite distance. Sarah studied Commander Ward as they walked, noting the way his eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the architecture, the people, the general mood of the city around them, without ever seeming rushed or nervous about it. It was, she thought, the behavior of someone gathering information as a habit, rather than out of suspicion, though perhaps, with humans, it was difficult to tell the two apart. Once inside the council chamber, the two delegations settled across from one another at a long table, and Drayon wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "Commander Ward, I will speak plainly. as I understand your people prefer. 3 months ago, an independent mining group operating near our border intercepted and destroyed what we now believe was a human exploration drone. We did not know its origin at the time. We take full responsibility for the failure to investigate more carefully, and we are prepared to offer whatever restitution your government deems appropriate. Commander Ward listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable until Drayon finished speaking. Then he nodded slowly. I appreciate the directness, Fleet Marshal. I will be equally direct in return. He paused, choosing his next words with obvious care. The drone in question was part of a long-range survey program, mapping unclaimed territory along several border regions, including this one. When contact was lost, our government initially suspected equipment failure. It was only after a secondary investigation traced the drone's last known position to Vicari-adjacent space that Task Force Meridian was dispatched to investigate directly. And the size of the fleet? Rethilvan asked, unable to hold the question back any longer. Forgive me, Commander, but 400 warships seems a significant response to a single lost drone. Something flickered across Commander Ward's face. Not quite a smile, but close to one. A fair question, Counselor. I will answer it honestly. The size of the fleet was not a response to the drone alone. It was a precaution, based on the fact that we had no prior contact with your people, and no reliable information about your military capability or intentions. When my government sends a survey mission into unknown territory and loses contact with it under unclear circumstances, our doctrine calls for a proportional show of readiness, not aggression, but readiness. We did not know if we were dealing with an accident, a hostile power, or something in between. 400 ships was judged sufficient to ensure Task Force Meridian could handle any outcome, while the silence you observed was intended to avoid provoking a conflict neither of us wanted, in case the situation proved to be a misunderstanding rather than an attack. Sarah found herself nodding slightly at this, and she saw Drayon do the same. It matched almost exactly what she had told the Council days earlier. And the power down itself, Drayon said. May I ask what purpose it served? 2 purposes, Commander Ward said. First, it reduced the chance of an accidental engagement. A fully powered fleet, sitting at your border with no clear communication, risks being mistaken for an imminent attack, which could provoke a defensive strike neither side intended. Powering down removed that risk. Second, he added, his tone growing slightly more direct, it demonstrated our discipline. I will not pretend otherwise. We wanted your people to understand, before any words were exchanged, that Task Force Meridian does not act carelessly, and does not act without complete control over every ship under its command. We believed that understanding would make honest conversation easier, not harder. The chamber was quiet for a moment as the Council absorbed this. It worked, Vesthane said finally, a note of dry humor in her old voice. Though I will admit, Commander, it also very nearly gave several of my colleagues heart failure. This time, the flicker on Commander Ward's face became an actual, brief smile. That was not the intent, Counselor, though I understand the effect. I hope, now that we are speaking directly, that effect can be replaced with something more productive. Agreed, Drayon said. Let us discuss restitution for the drone, and more importantly, let us discuss what a future relationship between our peoples might look like. The talks continued for the better part of the day. Restitution for the drone was agreed upon quickly, a simple exchange of resources, and a formal apology broadcast to human territory. The harder conversation came afterward, when Drayon raised the question that had been sitting unspoken beneath everything else discussed so far. Commander Ward, he said, I must ask directly. Does your government have further interest in this region? Territorial interest, I mean. Commander Ward considered the question for a long moment before answering. Not at present, Fleet Marshal. Task Force Meridian was dispatched to investigate the loss of a survey drone, not to claim territory. That said, I will not insult you by pretending our survey program will not continue in unclaimed space near your border. It will. What I can offer is this: a formal agreement establishing communication protocols between our peoples, so that any future incident, however small, is resolved through conversation rather than assumption. That, Drayon said, sounds like an excellent place to begin. Sarah watched the 2 leaders shake hands. an odd human custom she had read about but never seen performed. A brief, firm grip that seemed to carry more weight than the gesture itself suggested. Around the table, tension that had built for days finally began to ease, replaced by the quieter, more exhausting work of actually building something new between two very different peoples. By the time the human delegation departed the following morning, a framework for future contact had been agreed upon, along with a promise that Task Force Meridian would withdraw from the border within the week, once the final details of the drone restitution were confirmed. Sarah stood on the landing platform once more, watching the sleek delegation ship lift off and turn back toward the distant, silent fleet, and allowed herself, for the first time in days, to breathe easily. Whatever came of these talks, she understood now that the galaxy her people had known before that first sensor reading on the thin whisper no longer existed. A new neighbor had arrived, one capable of vanishing 400 ships into silence in under 20 seconds, and choosing, in the end, to speak first instead of striking first. It was a small mercy, she thought, but a significant one, and somewhere out past the edge of their solar system, the vast silent fleet of Task Force Meridian continued to wait, its lights glowing softly in the dark, a reminder of exactly how much rested on the words already spoken and the ones still to come. 6 days after the human delegation departed, everything the Vicari Council believed about the situation nearly fell apart in the space of a single hour. Scout Captain Ayeth Voss had remained on station near the border, as ordered, monitoring the human fleet as it began its promised withdrawal. Ships were leaving in small groups, peeling away from the massive formation and vanishing into whatever faster-than-light travel humans used, the same technology that had allowed the fleet to appear without warning in the first place. It was, Ayeth thought, a slow and almost gentle process, nothing like the sudden, overwhelming arrival that had started this entire chain of events. Then Doran's console lit up with an alert that made her heart stop. "Captain, I am reading a new arrival. Not human, not one of ours." He looked up, his 4 eyes wide with alarm. "Captain, it is a Culverian warship. A large one. It just dropped out of transit less than 200,000 kilometers from the remaining human formation." Ayeth felt cold dread settle into her stomach. The Culverians were an old enemy of humanity, a species that had fought 2 brutal wars against them decades earlier and lost both, badly. If a Culverian warship had appeared this close to the withdrawing human fleet, it was not a coincidence, and it was not likely to be friendly. "Identify its intentions if you can," she ordered. "Weapons status, shield status, anything." Doran's hands flew across his console. "Weapons are active, Captain. Shields are up. It is not approaching in a peaceful configuration. And Captain, I am reading a second contact, a third. There are more of them, dropping out of transit in a spread formation around the remaining human ships." "How many human ships are still in the area?" "Approximately 60, based on the last count. The bulk of the fleet already withdrew." Ayeth's mind raced. 60 human ships, caught by surprise, facing what looked like the opening moves of a coordinated ambush by a species with a long, bitter history against humanity. If the Culverians had been watching the withdrawal, waiting for the fleet to thin out before striking, this was exactly the moment they would choose. "Get command on the line, now," she said. "Full priority alert. And Doran, start recording everything. If this becomes a battle, our data may be the only outside record of what happens." Doran worked quickly, opening a priority channel back to Fleet Marshal Kell's office, though the delay of several minutes before anyone answered felt, to Ayeth, like the longest stretch of her career. She thought about the human delegation that had visited days earlier, about Commander Ward's calm, careful voice, about the fragile trust that had been built in that quiet council chamber. If a war broke out here now, so close to the border, all of that careful work could be undone in a matter of minutes. "Captain, command is on the line," Doran said finally. "This is Voss," Ayeth said, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage. "We have a developing situation near the withdrawing human fleet. Culverian warships, at least 5 confirmed, appear to be preparing a coordinated strike against the remaining human vessels. I am transmitting full sensor data now." There was a brief pause on the other end before Fleet Marshal Kell's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Understood, Captain Voss. Maintain your position and continue recording. Do not, under any circumstances, involve the thin whisper directly in this engagement. Your ship is not equipped for it, and I will not lose a scout crew over a fight that is not ours. Understood, Marshal. Keep the channel open. I want real-time updates. Yes, Marshal. Ayeth closed the channel and turned back to her screen, watching the tense standoff continue to unfold between the two fleets. Doran sat rigid at his station, his 4 eyes fixed on the readings, his fingers hovering over his console as though ready to act, though there was, in truth, nothing more either of them could do but watch, and record, and hope that whatever happened next did not spill across the border into the space they called home. Aboard the human command ship Meridian's Resolve, Admiral Elena Cross received the sensor alert calmly, the same way she received most information that crossed her console. She had commanded Task Force Meridian for nearly a decade, through engagements far more dangerous than a handful of Culverian warships attempting an ambush, and she did not intend to let this one rattle her. "Talk to me," she said to her tactical officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Captain Reyes. 5 Culverian warships, Admiral, dropping into a spread formation around our remaining 60 vessels. Weapons hot, shields up. This has the shape of an ambush, timed for when they thought our numbers would be thinnest. They thought wrong, Elena said. Order the remaining ships to hold position and power up defensive systems only. No offensive weapons unless fired upon first. I want to see what they actually intend before we commit to anything. Admiral, with respect, they clearly intend to attack. Why give them the first move? Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. Because, Captain Reyes, we are sitting in Vicari-adjacent space, having just spent a week convincing an entirely new species that humanity does not start fights it does not have to. If the Culverians want to throw the first punch here, in front of witnesses, they can go right ahead and do it. It will be the last mistake a great many of their ships ever make, and it will not be us who started it. Reyes considered this, then nodded slowly. Understood, Admiral. Holding defensive posture only. For nearly 10 minutes, the two fleets sat facing one another in tense silence, the Culverian ships circling at the edges of sensor range, clearly probing for weaknesses, clearly hoping for some sign of confusion or disorganization among the human formation. They found none. The 60 remaining human ships held their positions with the same disciplined stillness that had defined the entire fleet since its arrival. Weapons powered but not aimed, shields raised but not aggressive, waiting. Aboard the Thin Whisper, Ayeth watched the standoff with growing tension, relaying every detail back to command, as fast as her systems could process it. "Captain," Doran said suddenly, "the Culverian formation is shifting. I think they are preparing to fire." Ayeth's hands tightened on the edge of her console. If a battle broke out here, so close to Vicari territory, there was a real risk of the conflict spilling across the border, dragging her people into a war that had nothing to do with them. And yet she could not look away, could not stop recording, could not do anything but watch as the two fleets edged closer to violence. Then, without warning, one of the Culverian ships opened fire. It was a single shot, a testing shot perhaps, aimed at the outer edge of the human formation, and the response when it came was immediate and absolute. The nearest human ship's shields flared bright as the shot struck, absorbing the impact without visible damage. And then, in perfect unison, every human ship in the formation opened fire at once. "They are not holding back," Doran said, his voice tight with disbelief, as he watched the readings pour in. "Captain, this is coordinated. Every ship targeting a different Culverian vessel. No overlap, no wasted shots. It is like watching a single mind controlling 60 ships at once." Ayeth watched, transfixed, as the battle unfolded on her screen. It was over in less than 90 seconds. 2 of the 5 Culverian ships were destroyed outright, their hulls breaking apart under concentrated fire that left no time for their shields to compensate. A third was crippled, drifting and dark, its weapons and engines disabled but its hull intact. The remaining 2 broke off, engaging their own transit drives and vanishing from the battlefield entirely, fleeing rather than face the full weight of what remained of Task Force Meridian. "They ran," Doran said, still staring at his screen in disbelief. "Captain, they actually ran." Ayeth said nothing for a long moment, watching the aftermath of the brief, brutal engagement. The human fleet had not pursued the fleeing ships. It had simply reformed its position around the crippled Culverian vessel, weapons lowering back to standby, as though the entire battle had been nothing more than a minor interruption to an otherwise ordinary day. "Send the recording to command immediately," she said finally. "Full detail. I want them to see exactly what we just witnessed." Admiral Elena Cross watched the crippled Culverian ship on her own screen, drifting and helpless at the edge of her formation, and felt no particular satisfaction in the victory. It was, to her, simply the expected outcome of an old enemy making an old mistake, attacking while assuming a moment of weakness that had never actually existed. "Orders, Admiral?" Captain Reyes asked. "Send a boarding team to the disabled vessel," Elena said. "Recover any survivors, treat their wounded according to standard protocol, and take the ship's command crew into custody for questioning. I want to know why they thought this was a good idea, and I want to know if this was an isolated attack or something larger. And the two that fled? Log their transit signatures and send the data back to Fleet Intelligence. We will deal with them another day, if it comes to that." Elena rubbed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past week settle heavily on her shoulders. "Captain Reyes, send a message to the Vicari government as well. Full transparency, same as before. I want them to know exactly what happened here, and I want them to know it was not their people who were the target." "Yes, Admiral." As the boarding team prepared to depart, Elena allowed herself a moment to think about the strange, complicated dance of the past week, the silent arrival, the careful negotiation, and now this, a reminder that peace, once found, still had to be defended against those who saw it as an opportunity, rather than a relief. She had commanded Task Force Meridian through worse, and she suspected she would command it through worse again before her career was finished. The boarding team, led by a young lieutenant named Marcus Feld, reached the crippled Culverian vessel within 20 minutes. The ship's hull was scorched and broken in several places, its internal gravity failing in sections, but its crew compartments had survived largely intact. Feld's team moved through the corridors with careful, practiced efficiency, securing each section before advancing, treating the wounded Culverians they found along the way with the same brisk professionalism they would have shown their own injured. They found the ship's commander on the bridge, a tall Culverian officer named Rask Ivan, sitting in his damaged command chair with the stiff posture of someone waiting to be executed and trying not to show fear about it. "You are not going to kill me," Rask said, more statement than question, as Feld approached with two of his soldiers. "No," Feld said simply. "You are going to answer some questions instead." Rask studied him for a long moment, clearly expecting some trick, some delayed cruelty that never came. "Why not simply finish what your fleet started? We attacked you. By any reasonable standard, we forfeited any claim to mercy." "That is not how this works," Feld said, his tone patient, almost bored, as though explaining something obvious to a child. "You attacked, you lost, and now you are a prisoner instead of a corpse. That is not mercy. That is just how we do things. Now, who ordered this attack, and why here? Why now?" Rask hesitated, then, seeming to realize resistance would gain him nothing, began to speak. The story that emerged over the following hour, relayed back to Admiral Cross in real time, painted a picture of a small, unauthorized faction within the Culverian military, still bitter over their losses decades earlier, who had seen the human fleet's withdrawal as a rare opportunity to strike a symbolic blow without risking a full war with the wider human government. They had not expected to win outright. They had hoped only to inflict enough damage to prove a point, to show that Culverian pride had not been entirely broken. "A foolish plan," Elena said quietly, once the full report reached her. "Built on old grudges and worse information. They believed our numbers would be thin enough to catch us unprepared." "They were wrong on both counts, Admiral," Reyes said. "They were wrong on every count," Elena replied. "Send the prisoners back to Fleet Intelligence for full processing, and make sure the report on this unauthorized faction gets forwarded to the official Culverian government as well. If their leadership did not authorize this, they deserve to know some of their own people tried to start a war behind their backs. Best to let them clean their own house before we have to do it for them." "Yes, Admiral." For now, the immediate danger had passed, and a new relationship with a cautious, careful species called the Vicari had survived its first real test. The news reached Fleet Marshal Kell within the hour, delivered through the same relay chain that had carried every piece of this strange, tense week. He read the report from Ayeth Voss twice, then a third time, before calling Sarah Ireland back into his office. They defended themselves, he said, once she had read the report herself, against an old enemy, in our space, and they did not hesitate for even a moment. No, Marshal, Sarah agreed. They did not. And yet they held back until fired upon. They did not pursue the ships that fled. They are treating the wounded of an enemy who ambushed them. Drayon shook his head slowly, still trying to reconcile the overwhelming power he had just read about with the surprising restraint that had accompanied it. Analyst Iolin, I confess, I do not fully understand this species yet. Sarah allowed herself a small, tired smile. Neither do I, Marshal. If I am honest, I have studied them for 6 years, and every week seems to teach me something new. But I believe, more strongly than ever, that we made the right choice in dealing honestly with them from the start. Drayon nodded slowly, looking out at the darkening sky beyond his office window. Somewhere out past the border, the human fleet continued its slow withdrawal, one crippled enemy ship in tow, its business in this region very nearly finished. And somewhere further still, in territory the Vakari had never seen and could barely imagine, an old rivalry between humans and Colvarians had just been reminded, in the clearest possible terms, exactly why the Colvarians had lost their wars in the first place. 2 weeks after the battle near the border, the last of Task Force Meridian withdrew from Vakari-adjacent space, leaving behind nothing but a formal treaty, a set of communication protocols, and a great deal for the Vakari people to think about. Ayeth Voss watched the final human ships vanish into transit from the deck of the Thin Whisper, feeling a strange mixture of relief and something close to sadness, as though she were watching the end of the strangest, most important month of her career. Captain, Doran said, watching his own screen as the last gravity signature faded from their sensors. They are gone. Fully gone this time. Good, Ayeth said quietly. Let us go home, Doran. I think we have both earned some rest. But rest, as it turned out, would have to wait a little longer. When the Thin Whisper docked at Fleet Headquarters 3 days later, Ayeth found herself summoned directly to Fleet Marshal Kell's office, where Sarah Iolin was already waiting, along with several other senior officials she did not recognize. Captain Voss, Drayon said, rising to greet her personally, a gesture of respect she had not expected. Please, sit. You have had a difficult month, and you have earned a proper explanation of everything that has happened since. Ayeth sat, still slightly bewildered by the formality of the greeting. Marshal, with respect, I already know what happened. I was there for most of it. You were there for the events, Drayon said, but perhaps not for everything they set in motion afterward. Analyst Iolin, if you would explain. Sarah leaned forward, a small, tired smile on her face. Captain, in the weeks since the treaty was signed, we have received 3 additional communications from human territory. The first was a formal note of thanks for our honesty regarding the drone incident, along with confirmation that the independent mining group responsible has been formally warned by our own government to avoid similar mistakes in the future. The second was an offer, a cautious one, but a real one, to establish a limited trade relationship between our peoples, focused initially on scientific exchange, rather than military or economic matters. And the third? Ayeth asked. Sarah's smile widened slightly. The third was a personal note, addressed specifically to you, Captain. From Admiral Elena Cross herself. Ayeth blinked in surprise. To me? Drayon nodded, sliding a datapad across the desk toward her. She commended your professionalism during the initial encounter, and your restraint during the battle near the border, despite having a clear view of everything that happened. She noted, and I quote, that your reports were some of the clearest and most useful pieces of outside observation her intelligence division had ever received from a first contact species. Ayeth read the message twice, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest that she had not expected. She had spent the entire encounter terrified, uncertain, and constantly aware of how easily everything could have gone wrong. To hear that her fear-driven diligence had been seen, by the humans themselves, as a mark of professionalism, was not something she had prepared herself for. I do not know what to say, she admitted. You do not need to say anything, Dreon said. You need only continue doing exactly what you have already proven yourself capable of. The Council has decided, given your role in these events, to promote you to Senior Scout Captain, with oversight of all future border monitoring along this sector. It is, I am told, an unusually rapid promotion, but I believe you have more than earned it. Ayeth sat in stunned silence for a moment before finding her voice again. Thank you, Marshal. I will not disappoint the trust placed in me. I do not doubt it, Dreon said. None of us do. In the months that followed, the relationship between the Vakari and humanity grew slowly, carefully, the way all lasting things tend to grow. Scientific exchanges began first, small teams of researchers from both sides meeting at neutral outposts to share information on medicine, agriculture, and energy technology, each side surprised by how much the other had to offer despite their very different histories. Trade agreements followed soon after, cautious at first, then steadily more substantial, as trust built between two peoples who had begun their relationship under the shadow of a fleet powerful enough to end the Vakari's entire civilization in a single night. Sarah Ireland found herself promoted as well, made head of an expanded xenology division dedicated entirely to the study of humanity, now staffed with a dozen analysts instead of just herself. She spent long hours reviewing new reports, new recordings, new fragments of information gathered from the growing web of contact between the two species, always searching for a fuller understanding of a species that continued, in small ways, to surprise her. 6 months after the treaty was signed, Sarah was invited to attend the opening of the first joint research outpost, built on a small moon, roughly halfway between Vakari and human territory. It was a modest facility by the standards of either species, a handful of laboratories and living quarters connected by simple corridors. But to Sarah, it represented something far larger than its size suggested, proof that the fear of that first terrible night could be transformed, patiently, into something constructive. Commander Ward was there as well, representing the human side of the project, and he greeted Sarah with the same calm warmth he had shown during the original negotiations. Analyst Ireland, he said, shaking her hand in the human custom she had since grown used to. I understand congratulations are in order. Head of your own division now. Thank you, Commander. Though I confess, most days it still feels like I am chasing after your species, trying to understand it, rather than actually succeeding. Ward laughed, a short, genuine sound. I think that may simply be the nature of studying any people well enough to call them friends. My own analysts say much the same thing about the Vakari, if it comforts you at all. They toured the facility together, discussing the early research already underway, a joint project studying a strain of crop disease that had troubled both Vakari and human colonies in different ways, and a separate effort comparing long-term data on stellar radiation exposure, an area where each species had gathered valuable complementary information over their long, separate histories. It was slow, careful work, nothing like the drama of that first night, but Sarah found she preferred it that way. Peace, she was learning, did not need to be dramatic to be valuable. Sometimes it simply needed to be steady. May I ask you something, Commander? She said, as they stood looking out over the pale gray landscape of the moon through a wide observation window. Of course. Did your government ever consider that the fleet might frighten us so badly we would refuse to negotiate at all, that we might attack out of pure panic, rather than risk waiting to hear your intentions? Ward was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. It was considered, yes. It is always a risk, when you show a new species the full weight of what you could do. But in my experience, most species who are given a real choice, and given it honestly, choose to talk rather than fight. It is only when a people believe they have no other option, or believe they are being deceived, that panic tends to win out over reason. We gambled that your people were reasonable enough, and honest enough themselves, to choose the harder, better path. He glanced at her, a small smile touching his face. I am glad to say the gamble paid off. So am I, Sarah said quietly, watching the pale landscape stretch out beyond the window, thinking of Ayeth Voss, alone, on a small scout ship, on the worst night of her career, choosing to hold her position and record the truth rather than run from it. It had been, Sarah thought, the first small act of courage in a long chain of them, one that had ultimately led to this quiet, peaceful moment, standing beside a human she was proud to call a colleague, on a moon that belonged, in its own small way, to both their peoples now. One evening, nearly a year after the fleet's first appearance, she found herself reviewing a report from a joint scientific outpost, where a young Vakari researcher had asked a human counterpart, half in jest, why their fleet had chosen to power down so completely on that first night, rather than simply approaching openly and asking to talk. The human's answer, recorded and forwarded up through the usual channels, eventually reached Sarah's desk, and she read it with a small, thoughtful smile. Because, the human researcher had written, we did not know you yet. And when you do not know someone, the kindest thing you can do, if you have the strength to do it, is show them exactly how much damage you could cause, and then choose not to cause it. It is not a threat, it is a promise. It says, we could have hurt you, and we chose peace instead, and that choice was ours to make, freely, without being forced into it by weakness. There is a difference between peace born of fear and peace born of restraint. We wanted you to know, from the very first moment, which kind of peace you were being offered. Sarah set the report down and looked out her office window, at the pale evening light settling over the Vakari capital, thinking about the long, tense month that had started with a single terrified message from a scout captain watching an impossible fleet vanish into silence. It had been, in its own strange way, the beginning of something good, not because humanity had proven itself harmless, but because it had proven itself capable of tremendous harm, and had chosen, deliberately and completely, not to cause it. Back at Fleet Headquarters, Fleet Marshal Kell found himself, in the quieter moments of his growing workload, reflecting often on how close everything had come to disaster. He kept a copy of Ayeth Voss's original report, the very first one sent from the Thin Whisper on that impossible first night, saved on his personal terminal, and he returned to it more often than he liked to admit. He read, again, the line she had written near the end of that first message. We do not know what the humans are planning. We only know that they are ready for it, and we are not. It had felt, at the time, like a warning of doom. Now, a year later, it felt more like the opening line of a lesson his entire people had needed to learn. That readiness was not the same as hostility, and that the greatest danger in that first terrible night had never truly been the fleet itself, but the fear it might have caused the Vakari to act rashly before understanding what they were truly facing. He thought, too, of the Colvarian officer, Rask Ivan, whose unauthorized attack had so nearly reignited an old war in the middle of everything else. The official Colvarian government, once informed, had moved quickly to discipline the rogue faction responsible, eager to avoid further conflict with a human military that had just demonstrated, in the clearest possible terms, exactly how costly such conflict would be. It was, Dreon thought, a small but telling reminder that peace was rarely permanent or universal. It had to be defended, quietly and constantly, by people willing to hold their ground without losing their patience. He closed the old report and turned his attention back to the growing pile of new work on his desk. Trade agreements to review, joint military exercises to approve, a dozen small administrative details that came with building a genuine, lasting relationship between two very different peoples. It was, in its own way, far less exciting than the tense drama of that first month. He found he did not mind that at all. Ayeth Voss, now senior scout captain, stood on the deck of a new, larger vessel that had been assigned to her following her promotion, watching a training exercise unfold on her main screen. Doran Mesh, promoted alongside her and now serving as her chief sensor officer, sat at his familiar station, watching the same readings, with the same careful attention he always had. "Do you ever think about it, Captain?" he asked during a quiet moment. "That first night, the fleet going dark." "Often," Ayeth admitted. "I do not think I will ever forget it. The fear of it, mostly. But also," she paused, searching for the right words, "also the strange kind of hope that came after, that something so powerful chose to speak instead of strike. I think about that a great deal." "Do you think we made the right choice, answering honestly, the way we did?" Ayeth considered the question, watching her screen, watching the quiet, ordinary patrol continue exactly as it should. No impossible fleets, no silent warnings, just the steady, familiar rhythm of a border finally at peace. Yes, she said finally. I think it was the only choice that could have led us here, and I think, whatever comes next, whatever new species we encounter, whatever new fears we face, I think that lesson will serve us well. Honesty, met with patience, can turn even the most terrifying beginning into something worth having. Doran nodded slowly, turning back to his console, and the two of them settled into the familiar quiet of another ordinary patrol, one small part of a much larger galaxy that had, in the space of a single strange month, grown a little less frightening and a little more understood. Far beyond the border, in human territory that the Vicari were only just beginning to learn about, Admiral Elena Cross filed her final report on the Vicari First Contact mission, closing out one of the calmer chapters of her long career. She did not know, not yet, what the next encounter would bring, what new species waited somewhere out in the dark, watching, wondering, afraid. But she knew, as she always did, that when the moment came, Task Force Meridian would be ready, not to conquer and not to destroy, but simply to stand, patient and disciplined, until the other side was ready to talk. And somewhere out in the vast, quiet dark between the stars, that readiness, more than any weapon humanity had ever built, remained its greatest strength of all.